The following program is a production of Tim Jackson, who assumes full responsibility for its content. The content of this program does not represent the views of FCTV, which serves as a forum for community expression and offers TV training, production facilities, and channel time to all Falmouth residents and organizations. Welcome back to West Falmouth Library's historical presentation series, The History and Heritage of West Falmouth, a project of the West Falmouth Library. This project is made possible by the Go Local grant, which is a federal grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services administered by the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. Thanks to input from our viewers, we've put together a selection of clips from our episodes to date. Up first, our viewers' favorite, the choral reading of Bertha Goes Whaling. This entertaining memoir of a West Falmouth resident, Bertha May Hamlin Boyce, is brought to life by a fun-loving group of local volunteers. Let's watch as West Falmouth Library research librarian Renee Voorhees gives the introduction.
This is the story that Bertha recalled in her 86th year. So enjoy.
Part 1. This story was written by the author in her 96th year about her voyage as a 5-year-old accompanying her father, Captain John C. Hamlin, on the bark, the Islander, out of New Bedford in 1871, bound for the Indian Ocean. This is Bertha's story.
Maria, it's almost time for my ship to sail. Are you coming with me this time?
That was my father, Captain John C. Hamlin, speaking to my mother. She had gone with my father on 2 previous voyages, and he hoped she was going with him this time.
My name is Alice. I am 7 years old. I was born in Australia.
My name is Henry. I'm 5 years old. I was born on Norfolk Island in the South Seas.
Oh, John, I don't see how I can go this time. There are 4 children to leave at home. And another soon to come.
Then a trunk came down from the attic. Aunt Abby and Uncle Josiah came up from Picasset to take care of the children left behind, as they always did. And suddenly, me, age 5, and my brother, Benjamin, age 2.5, were fitted for a whaling voyage. We're going whaling, we're going whaling.
Hush, you two. Say goodbye to your brothers and sisters.
Bye, Etta, bye, Alice, bye, Henry, bye, John.
The bark, another name for a whaling ship, the Islander, sailed out of New Bedford, which is where most whalers departed in the 1870s.
Hurry along, children. The stagecoach is waiting to take us to New Bedford.
The family arrived in New Bedford with bag and baggage, and sailors rowed them to the Islander, waiting for them in the harbor.
Oh, I hope the sailors don't get my beautiful new hat wet.
Once on board the ship, the family made their way to the captain's cabin.
Oh, John, the space is so small. What am I going to do with 2 lively children in such a small space?
Mother was used to the big house in West Falmouth.
A replica of this house sits in the upstairs lobby of the West Falmouth Library during December.
Now, Maria, look here. We will sleep in this swinging bed, and Bertha and Benjamin will sleep on the trundle bed we will pull out from under the swinging bed. You will make do, as you always do.
On July 25th, 1871, we set sail for the Indian Ocean.
Bertha, we see whales?
Yes, Benjamin, we will see whales. No, I hope the whales stay out of sight or Papa will catch them.
Alas, the captain sent home 8 695 barrels of sperm oil taken in 2 years at the sea on the Indian Ocean.
Everyone wonders what we did for amusement on the ship. Instead of woods and green fields, we had the ship deck.
Go play, children. The weather is warm in July. You won't always be able to play above on deck. Be careful and don't bother your father.
First, Benjamin and I went to the cook's galley, where we hoped to get a handout. Look, Berta, a sea turtle. Benjamin, be careful. He does not look too friendly.
When the children were not bothering the sailors, they spent hours riding on the turtle's back, being careful to keep away from the turtle's head so as not to get bitten. Remember, the children were ages 5 and 2.5 and trusted alone on the deck of the whaler. For the most part, they avoided trouble, but there were exceptions.
Ben, get down from there. Berta, what? Can I swim? Ben, you climb down right now before Father sees you.
Little Ben was holding onto a rope and billowing out over the sea as the ship rolled back and forth. Suddenly, a call came from the crow's nest.
There she blows.
Bertha and Ben ran to the side of the ship.
Look, Ben, down go the whaleboats and the harpooners. They will chase the whale until he surfaces again. They must find just the right spot to put in the harpoon. Whales are dangerous, and their big jaws can swallow a whaleboat and all the sailors. I remember a whale jaw that hung in a tree near our driveway in West Falmouth for a long time.
Once the whale was killed, it was towed to the ship. The cutting stage was lowered, and the sailors peeled off the blubber in large pieces. The blubber was hauled aboard and cut into smaller pieces called Bible leaves, and cooked in tripods over fires on deck.
I often wondered how safe a fire was on the deck of a wooden ship. But when the fires burned all night, Ben and I would chase each other around the ship, jumping in and out of shadows.
It was my job to keep track of the names and locations of islands where we went ashore. I also had to write a daily log for each day we were at sea. I often drew pictures of the whales we had spotted in the margins of the journal.
In November, the captain wrote,
Next week is Thanksgiving. I hope the next Thanksgiving will be spent at home. If it weren't for hopes, what would we do?
One day, the sailors went on shore to an island and brought back a pail of turtle eggs.
And one day, they brought back cow milk.
Now, children, take care. And do not drink too much of the milk. I need to scald the milk so it will last longer.
Mother put the milk on the table, and when she wasn't looking, I sneaked a drink. I am dead, I cried, burning my mouth.
Come, Bertha, I have some Arabian balsam. It will help you sleep, and then you will feel better.
Sometimes another whale ship was sighted. That was a great day. The captains would visit each other, have a gam, conversation between the whalers, and dinner, and talk of world affairs and share experiences. Gam also referred to a gathering of whales.
Berta, me bored. Let's go see what the sailors are doing.
Hi, children. I'm carving whalebone. When I polish and decorate it with India ink, it's called scrimshaw.
I was quite proud that I was a 33rd degree Mason, so I designed the Mason emblem on whale teeth and ostrich eggs.
It is so nice to have the children on deck visiting their father and the sailors. I need to get this yarn wound around this swift and use my gagging wheel, a fork made from whalebone, to crimp this pie.
My mother was known for her pies and hard gingerbread. With 8 children and all the neighborhood children around, she didn't have time to make cookies. But when I got older, I did have time. And everyone knew me as the cookie lady of West Falmouth.
We sailed the Indian Ocean all of 1872. August 31st, 1872 is Bertha's birthday. I guess we will be spending it on a ship anchored between Africa and Madagascar.
Do you know what I got for a birthday present? My little brother, Ernest Seymour Hamlin. He was born on the ship the day before my birthday. When Ernest grew up, the kids used to tease him by calling him an African and saying he could never be president of the United States of America.
Bertha, come quick. Look what I'm getting you for your birthday.
It was a whale. They caught a whale on my birthday. Later, Father promised me a watch for a real birthday present.
Come, Bertha. Mother and I are going to meet the chief of Madagascar, and you are invited.
Benjamin, you won't believe it. The chief had 7 wives. They were dark-skinned, of course, being Africans, and they were dressed in white. Their lips were blood red from chewing bale nuts. I will tell all the girls when I get home that lipstick comes from bale nuts.
It's early 1873. I think we have caught enough whales.
And I am tired of attending 1, 2, 3 children on a whaler.
It's time to head home.
But first, we stopped in Australia. Well, Tasmania to be exact. Ben, look at this road. It was made by convicts. What's a convict? Someone who builds roads.
I like the wild roses on the convict road. I'm tired of looking at water.
The sailors took the family across the water to Australia, where they stayed with Mrs. Tassel, a missionary.
Berta, what's a missionary?
Someone who has a mission. She has Sunday school for the natives. You ask too many questions.
Here, Bertha, Mrs. Tassel wants you to have a Bible.
Mrs. Tassel has lots of Bibles to give away. I still have this Bible with my name and Mrs. Tassel's name and the date. But the words are so old and so small that I cannot read them anymore.
Well, here, Bertha, Mrs. Tassel wants you to have the songbook so that you can sing to your brothers.
Well, I lost the songbook on the way home, but I still remember the song. I want to be an angel, and with the angels stand, a crown upon my forehead, and a harp in my hand.
Part 3. The ship was sold in March 1873. Captain Hamlin had decided to give up whaling and go home. The first mate, Mr. Hiram E. Swift of Whitman, Massachusetts, took over as captain.
I was happy to see that Captain Swift brought his little girl and his wife onto the ship, but no little boy. But perhaps his wife would have a baby boy on ship who could never be president of the United States, too.
Bertha, I have a story for you. One day you went into my cabin and found my pocketbook to play with. Do you remember what you told me?
No, sir.
You told me you didn't take the white money, you took only the yellow money.
I remember. I just wanted the gold. Even at the young age of 6, I knew the difference.
Captain Hamlin and family were now ready to return home by way of London.
We stopped at Lisbon, Portugal.
And Le Havre, France.
I nearly visited those places because I have on my living room table a pretty little shell snuff box from France and a large shell that held a thimble, little scissors, and a case for needles that Papa bought me in Lisbon.
Our next stop is London. I'm so excited. I run everywhere, looking at everything. Then I'm almost lost in too many people. Help, help, I cry.
Benjamin! There you are. Must you always be running? You must stay closer, I will lose you in the crowd. I did not lose you at sea, and I am not about to lose you in London.
In London, we got to go to the zoo.
And ride an elephant.
Our next stop was the Azores.
A man was selling cakes from a little tin trunk, and Mother bought a beautiful lace shawl made from the fibers of a tree. Not silk or cotton, which I still have. Must be a museum piece now. And also, we have some flowers.
Made out of feathers.
The family left home on a steamer.
Berta, what's a steamer?
Something that uses steam. Can we ask him questions?
So we left West Falmouth in a stagecoach. We sailed on a whaling ship. We rode steamers. We returned to West Falmouth and found a railroad was built. So we rode the train home from the boat.
Of course, when we got to the station, there was no one there to meet us. There were no telephones in those days, and no one knew when we would arrive.
So we walked home.
I will never forget that walk home. The boys' house wasn't built then. The only house I remember was painted white with blue blinds. It looked very pretty. Our first stop, of course, was our home, the Hamlin House. We were so excited to see Aunt Abby and Uncle Josiah and our brothers and sisters, and they were excited to see us.
Maria, you let me at that baby.
And John, Bertha, and Ben, come meet the horse, the hens, the chickens, and the 2 pigs.
Life is going to be quite different from our life on the ship in the Indian Ocean. There were hay fields in front of the house and woods to explore at the back of the house as we got acquainted with West Falmouth all over again.
But
That's another story.
Captain John C. Hamlin was born in 1829 to parents Benjamin Hamlin and Betsy Baxter. He was the second oldest of 10 children. He married Maria F. Toby, who was born in Sandwich in 1837 on October 9, 1856. Maria died in 1913 at the age of 76. John died in 1874 at the age of 44. Together they had 8 children in all. The last was Leonella, born in 1874, the year John died. Captain Hamlin spent 24 years at sea, 16 as a master or captain. In the last 2 years of his life, he purchased and managed a store in Falmouth.
Next, a fascinating look at how responsible collective resource management spurred innovation in animal husbandry on West Falmouth's rocky hillsides before the Industrial Revolution. Because of the steeply inclined terrain and the high value placed on salt marsh for the profitable and growing industry of growing silage for sheep, real estate lots in West Falmouth were laid out in a series of narrow slices to give each prospective owner a more or less equitable share of the needed resources. However, the practical-minded landowners kept a collective flock of sheep and hired shepherds to mind them as a group, which led to innovation in keeping track of their profits. Presenter Linda Okagawa explains.
From the earliest settlement of the area until about 1840, sheep raising was a central theme of the economy in the West Falmouth community. By 1831, Falmouth was the leading sheep raising town in the county. Much of this activity was in West Falmouth, which had the greatest amount of natural pasture and in particular an abundance of salt hay that was readily available as fodder. Despite the early settlers' plan of laying out these lots to individual farms, it appears that the lots were never used to contain individual herds of sheep. Free range was preferred. The flocks of sheep ran wild in the forest, as did hogs at the time. So there were so many sheep in Falmouth, and they were often running on common land, that a method of identifying ownership evolved. And they cut marks into the ears of sheep in a pattern specific to one owner. To the left on this slide here, it shows that the pattern is cut into the left ear, and then on the right of the line is the pattern that was cut into the right ear. The earmarks was interesting because if you read the town meeting minutes from way back whenever, you always have somebody coming in to file his earmark in the town record books. Now, with these free-ranging sheep and the composite herds, there were a number of paid positions that were developed here. First of all, I mentioned there were town-appointed shepherds. Then, the Commonwealth required certain positions of every town. A fence viewer, a pound keeper, a field driver. Interestingly enough, I looked into the articles in the the state documents, and those things were in effect until 1965 or something. And I think many towns still have a fence viewer, which is kind of a person who settles disputes about boundaries and so forth. So they've evolved into something more like the Board of Appeals or something. Another interesting thing is they needed some bounty hunters. Wolves, in particular, were a threat to sheep, and the town paid bounties for killing them. So I looked up, there's some stories about that. And they needed sheep shearers when the time came because they needed extra resources and also the expertise of these the nomadic sheep shearers who picked up work here and there. As mentioned now, impounding was the method that the town came up with to keep the sheep under control. So they built a pound and appointed a pound keeper, not sure who it was yet, and then they charged fines to the owners to retrieve the detained sheep. In 1739, a vote was passed in town meeting about the impounding of sheep, and it provided that the fines should be equally divided between the person who took up the sheep and the poor of the town. So this became a source of income for what was very important to the early settlers, and that was taking care of the poor of the town.
Some viewers found the reading of an advertisement from the Enterprise to be particularly amusing.
Good morning. I am going to read half of the poem, and my sister, my twin sister, will read the other half. It will be a family event. When Cranberries Are in Bloom, and it was written in the Falmouth Enterprise in 1897. Now the grower inward fancies, as he takes his yearly chances, that he's solid and he dances, be sure to give him room. When the picker dreams of measures and many bogey pleasures, in his mind he counts his treasures when cranberries are in bloom. But both will come to sorrow, for the cranberry worm will borrow the blossom on the morrow, fold it around him like a tomb. Though with enterprise and vigor they have planned the profits bigger, is the worm that cuts the figure when cranberries are in bloom. An insect powder, PDQ, that's made by us for sale to you, not just as good but something new, will stop a wormy boom, and deal to vermin's death at sight, as sure as morning follows night. And as to price, oh that's all right, when cranberries are in bloom. Thank you.
Other viewers were amazed that there were industries such as the salt works or shipwrights, and of course, the tag factory, right here in West Falmouth.
The tag factory. The tag factory has, I would say, undoubtedly, maybe, the greatest business venture in the history of West Falmouth for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was in existence for almost 50 years. And it was run by a woman for 40 of those years. Okay? So I'll let you look at the slide for a minute so you can understand why there was a need for these tags. So they were, predominantly women, were responsible for tying the strings, like on the tags that you have, and then shipping them back to the Denison Company in Framingham. But Matilda Denison, married to George Swift from West Falmouth, would come down here summers. She'd come down to visit, and she thought that the women here, there were so many men at this time, just coming back from whaling or had found other occupations, that the women would be able to earn some money. And so Aaron left his company to his brother, or to his son, I'm sorry, E.W. Dennison. That is his correct name, Eliphalet Wharf. No wonder he went by E.W., but he invented a shipping tag with a washer. So when you ship goods across country or on boats, the tag would not rip off from the item. And so it was a very novel sort of thing in the late 1800s because it ensured that you would get the price you wanted for something that you shipped to somebody else. And this, Milt Williamson and I were trying to figure out, it may have been built on the back of the Boyce property. I saw a reference to it one place and I couldn't find it again. But this was Bertha May had, hold on, I gotta get her name again. Gilbert, Annie R. Boyce ran the business out of her home. And then at some point, they built this as a factory for the women to meet at and do their work. So this is a slide of the women in a home, maybe Annie's, but they had tag stringing bees all over West Falmouth and other people's homes at the Methodist Church. And so they were paid 12 to 17 cents for 1,000 tags.
That looks like an inside of
Does it? Yeah. And then one Davisville woman. So women came from far away. There were over 100 people employed in this tag factory. Actually strung 6,000 of those tags you have in your hand, okay, in a day.
While the tag factory and other industries seemed anathema to West Falmouth as we know it today, the concept of building ships in West Falmouth Harbor, a harbor that is no friend to even shallow draft vessels, is incredible indeed. Susan Carless gave us a treatise on shipbuilding in Falmouth that was amusing, informative, and surprising. Here are what I considered to be the highlights of her presentation.
Talking about shipbuilding in this very specific location on Cape Cod, of course it started out with the early Native Americans with canoes and small fishing vessels. And then the English settlers came in. The first registered ship was out of the Tuxet trading post, and that was for trade up to Boston and Plymouth. When you talk about Falmouth shipbuilding, it almost always means Woods Hole, because that was the only place with a deep enough harbor until they dredged in the very late 1800s. Shipbuilding in Falmouth mainly was run by Elijah Swift. So Elijah Swift, mostly what he was building the boats for was for whaling, but not always. So he's a very unique looking individual on your handouts with the eye patch and the pair of glasses over the eye patch. To back up the big picture again, Falmouth didn't have a harbor, Woods Hole did. But there was also shipbuilding in Quissit, West Falmouth, and up in Megansett. Elijah Swift was a carpenter by trade and a tree lover. He started out traveling down south to gather live oak timbers. Live oak being very good in shipbuilding because it's weather resistant and pest resistant, so good for ships, but they didn't use it for plankings because of the funky way the trees branch. They used it for the knees. One of the interesting stories in the middle, right next to this picture, is when his barn burned, he went out to see if the tree next to it was saved, but I'm going to do a small contradiction on this. And it says it was a live oak. Those are southern trees. They did not grow on Cape Cod. What did grow is elm trees, and he planted the elm trees along the village green in Falmouth. And he went out to make sure his beloved elm tree was not burned because he could build another barn, but you can't plant another tree like that. His boat building operations mostly were in Woods Hole, but I think he was the backer behind what happened in West Falmouth as well, with the British Navy raiding the coastal areas, raiding the farms, but also messing with the ships. So he built a very large ship in his yard, which is by the current Falmouth Town Hall. It took a team of 50 oxen to tow it down to the water, and they launched from there. So he's importing live oak from the south and bringing it up. It is also used in making, I don't know, a slightly famous ship, the U.S. Constitution. He did not build that, but it was made of the live oak. At one point, 2/3 of all ships built in Falmouth, most of it all, were built by Elijah Swift and his family, his operations. He had contracts with the U.S. Naval Department to build the warships. Many of his ships' names, Sarah Herrick was the first whaler built in Falmouth in 1830, but many of his names use Native American names for the ships. Pocahontas, Uncas, Awashonks, Ogamock, and also the William Penn. And he had an interesting relationship with the Native Americans in Mashpee, the Wampanoag tribe there, and also William Penn, as a Quaker, promoted friendships and good working relationships with the Native Americans. So there's kind of some overlap of why he named the ships for Native Americans. And there was also some issue of white settlers invading tribal lands in Mashpee to steal timber, which was probably being filtered back into the shipbuilding trade. So Swift had the Bar Neck Wharf Company in Woods Hole. He opened that in 1828. The ships were built there starting around 1819 and launched in from there. The height of the whaling industry was 1830 and was pretty much over by 1875. But West Falmouth Harbor, known more as Hog Island Harbor, used to be deeper. There was a hurricane in 1815 that blew the sand in and made it more shallow, but it was still in operation up through the 1830s, so it couldn't have wiped out the harbor to then. So there, I know there was another bigger storm that did make the harbor more shallow. But Solomon Lawrence was one of the main Hog Island shipbuilders and designers. He did build ships for Elijah Swift in West Falmouth and Woods Hole. He was the father of Captain John R. Lawrence. So all these, Lawrence and Swifts we're going to find all throughout all of Falmouth, and especially West Falmouth history.
While I do not usually associate shipbuilding with West Falmouth Harbor, I do associate pink granite with West Falmouth. Here Renee Voorhees tells some interesting stories about West Falmouth pink granite and pink granite in Washington, D.C.
This is another farmstead. This is William Gifford the Fourth. This is the picture of his farm in the mid-1800s. Notice the pink granite barn in the background, which he built. And with all of the animals in front of the barn, it's likely that this picture was the staging area for the railroad that was built through West Falmouth in 1870 to 1872. And next month in our follow-up program, we'll talk more about the industry that came into the area. And there's another picture of the pink granite. Pink granite is found all over the world. It is not unique to West Falmouth. However, the concentration of pink granite on the glacial moraine is unique. And it used to be much more prevalent, but it was used in buildings and structures, some of which have long since no longer exist. They've fallen down or they've been plowed under. Maury Harlow Hawks mentioned that a lot of the pink granite that was up behind the library on the hill was covered when they put in the playground. This is another picture of another pink granite barn. This one was built by George and Daniel Weeks, who were mariners that when they got home became stonemasons. And George built his house using pink granite as a foundation in 1828, and he started the barn, but he died before it was completed. So his son Daniel inherited the property and completed the barn. It just went up for sale, if anyone's interested. There's a story behind the pink granite that made its way to the Kennedy Memorial in Washington, D.C., and the Eternal Flame. And it's a story of Rufus O.D. Garland, an antique dealer, who I think kind of took advantage of Mr. Baker, and I've forgotten his first name. Anyway, he had a bunch of stone in the back of his property at Baker Monument. The property's still there on Jones Road. And so Rufus showed up one day and pointed at the pile of granite and said, how much do you want for that? And Mr. Baker hadn't really thought about it very much, shot him a price, and he said, fine. The next day, 2 trucks came, loaded all the granite up, and left, without really saying what it was used for. So he got very curious. He asked around, why was it valuable? Who wanted that much granite? And no one was finally sure of what the rationale was. So he finally approached Rufus Garland in his antique store, come to find out that Jackie Kennedy would shop there, and after her husband passed, she looked to Rufus as a friend and as somebody local to find her pink granite to be used at the gravesite in Washington, D.C. The 3.2-acre Kennedy gravesite in Washington, D.C. And she wanted it left natural. And so that was the instruction, is to make it just kind of blend in with the rest of the landscape there.
Our viewers have asked about the model of the Caleb O. Hamlin House referenced in Bertha Goes Whaling. Here we represent the descriptions of the house from the Falmouth story by Bertha M. Hamlin Boyce, as read by West Falmouth Library Director Lois Hiller, and The Hamlin House as I Remember It by Alliston Gifford, as read by research librarian Renee Voorhees. Both stories have been enhanced with previously unreleased video of the model house. Enjoy.
The model replica of the house is the house of Captain Caleb O. Hamlin, and it's located across the street at 606 West Falmouth Highway. And that is the model of the house you're going to see around the corner.
People love this house and love being in this house. The Hamlin House, standing so proudly on the bank of the east side of the road. In back, we owned about a mile of oak woods. In front was a lovely view of Buzzards Bay. There was a driveway on each side of the house. On the north, it was shaded by very tall trees, which were a landmark for fishermen out in the bay. We had an apple orchard on the north side. On the south side, there were huge chestnut trees that were very beautiful when in blossom and a joy to the children when the chestnuts were ripe. There were also pear trees, cherry trees, and a flower garden on the south side of the drive. The Hamlin House was built before the war of 1812. It had 5 large rooms on the first floor, besides a well room with a pump, which furnished us with water. The well was very deep and the water was very good. The house was heated by wood stoves. In the kitchen, there were brick ovens and an arch with a large iron kettle in which water was heated when a pig was killed. I imagine they heated water there for other things too, but anyway. This was the way it was when the Hamlin House was built. Of course, we had a cook stove and used wood for heat. The Hamlin House was quite a landmark and was used for church suppers and all social affairs. Alliston Gifford has written a very interesting account of what went on there. Okay, and back to the poem.
Yes, this is Alliston's account. Alliston was a Gifford, the original Gifford family, a reverend, who preached all over the state of Massachusetts, but he always came back here and spent time with family, spent time with friends. And so the title of this poem, although you will realize that It's more a reflection than a poem. It's the Hamlin House as I remember it. It is a house I always loved in that hometown village of mine. It stood on an upland where one could see far out over harbor and bay. The house itself, like the folks that lived there, was straight and true. It had grace and dignity. As I remember, it was the best anywhere around. In keeping with the house was the family. It had culture and refinement. It had books and magazines. It was acquainted with places and people far away, neighbors like the folks who lived in that house. There were children, some not my age, others older, all of the better sort. One boy was my age. There was a girl younger, but not by much, and a girl a little older, yet enough so that when she spoke, we listened. Must have been Bertha. I was a barefoot boy with freckles so thick, one wondered where the boy was. I lived in a house that, like the boy, didn't have much, and like the boy, didn't look like much. Naturally, I took notice of the house, beautiful and all, but envied the young folks who lived there. In this house, beautiful, was a thought of others, especially of the youth of the village. Occasionally, the doors swung wide open to us. We went in for games and songs and things that sandpapered the rough parts in our manners. And we were plenty rough. Those were times to remember. We all grew up going to school in the village. Later, we made the school in the center some miles away. I walked the 3 miles and more, but the ones from the house up the hill were more fortunate with a horse and carriage. Then I went away, but before going, some of us gathered in the old library by the pond to form a church league of youth. Again, the house I admired, for out of it came that girl a bit older, and she led the way. It was she who lassoed me to take a part and reach for better things. The house on the hill is standing still, though some of its folks have gone away. They left us much we shall never forget. Their influence is here to stay. And that's Reverend Alliston B. Gifford. I don't know really who the girl is he is referring to, but obviously she made an impression.
We hope you have enjoyed this special compilation of our viewers' favorite moments. Thank you to all our viewers for your continued interest in the history and heritage of West Falmouth, and please keep your comments and suggestions coming. Until next time, this has been your host Tim Jackson saying goodbye from the West Falmouth Library for this episode of History and Heritage of West Falmouth.